Hello, everybody. It's John here. I'll throw up a poll here just to give us an idea, mainly related to this whole COVID scare. So we're going to talk a little bit about, the world, more specifically the GP world, as it relates to what's going on right now. But I figured a good question to start out would be, to find out, those of you that are actually able to work from home. With everything that's going on, of course, most organizations are having their staff, if possible, work from home, if you're lucky enough to do so. So just want to find out, those of you that currently aren't on GP365, obviously the ones that are, I know your answer. All right, I think I'm going to close up the poll here. Just a minute, and we'll get going. Good to see some familiar names. Hey, Wei. Hope you're well. Sabrina and Carlos, you guys aren't getting a shout out. You guys are too familiar. Sorry. Just a sigh.
That's all you get.
Yeah, I get it. Carlos, we're gonna need some real banger jokes from you today. With all the depressing stuff that's going on in the world, we gotta make this uplifting.
That's putting me on the spot. I don't know. I didn't do the usual research that I normally do for the jokes, so they'll be all impromptu stuff. We'll see how it goes.
Fair enough. All right, so let's see if I can get the screen shown here. Just bear with me. Okay, so let's get started. I'm sure a few of you will trickle in over the next couple of minutes, but today we're talking about supply chain. So Carlos is going to be giving us a run through kind of what its capabilities are at a high level, I would say. And we also have a boot camp aimed at going through the nitty gritty and details and configuration side, which I think we'll talk a little bit about later. So just keep in mind, if today, as we're talking and showing you items, there's certain things that you think would be useful, write them down. And keep in mind that we do have a boot camp in, I think, a couple months, 2 months, maybe we'll look at the dates, but you can join that and get a good sense of how to do everything. So with that said, let's maybe get rolling. So I think most of you know who we are, but of course, we're based out of Toronto, Canada. I don't know about where all of you guys are, but it's a very weird time for us. Our building was shut down because of the COVID-19 pandemic that's going on, and we're all working from home. So it's a bit of a strange time that way. We're lucky because we're pretty set up to work from home. So for us it's not a huge deal, but I know for some of you it's probably a big change in process, or some of you may be even going into the office still, especially if you work in an establishment that requires that. So yeah, food for thought, but we do GP and only GP, and more specifically, GP365 allows you to have your on-premise installation of GP inside of the Microsoft Cloud with nothing to worry about. So when we talk about today and everything that's going on with remote access, obviously that's a big perk. We've been quite busy with companies coming to us wanting to move their GP workload into the Azure cloud to be all set for the COVID concerns. So either way, most of you I think know who we are by now. And in terms of what we do, I'll just quickly here at a high level. Of course, we provide a hosted Dynamics GP platform inside of Microsoft Azure. And the whole idea is that you can access the full GP client from anywhere in the world. You don't have to worry about anything other than your monthly subscription cost. We're also building out a variety of really cool features that we'll talk a little bit about later on too, as it relates to roadmap and what we're working on. So very passionate about GP, have no plans to do anything but GP and to keep making our GP365 experience better and better. And yeah, that's a little bit about us. Let's talk about COVID. Not that I want to talk about anything that's maybe a bit down or depressing, but I do want to mention that right now we are, number one, staffing for obviously an increase in organizations wanting to move their GP urgently to the cloud. If it's at the office, and even if you can access it from home, if nobody's going in to maintain it, or if something happens with it, that can be a bit scary. So we are running a promotion, as some of you know, and some of you have taken advantage of this month, to upgrade you to GP 365 and the latest version of GP for no cost other than the subscription fee. So we also decided to release a not-for-profit and healthcare promotion. So if any of you are in either of those spaces, reach out and we'd be happy to discuss what that means for you. And of course, my email's at the bottom there, or you can email info, which will go to a few of us, and somebody will get back to you as soon as possible. But I just wanted to mention that if you're in a state where you're not sure if you can work from home, or you can't work from home, you might want to consider this before it's too late. Obviously, we're not in a lockdown situation yet. Hopefully we aren't, and I keep hoping that the news is going to get better every day, and waking up, hoping that they have great news, but right now it doesn't look like that. So I just want to make sure that if you are in a situation like that, get ahead of it, and don't have yourself in a position where you have to go in, or you have no access to your financial system because you're not able to go in or allowed to go in. So reach out to me if you want to talk about it, and we can do that.
Maybe one thing to throw out there is, I was thinking, if anyone has any questions on how to work from home in relation to GP, then they can feel free to send us an email or give us a call and just ask. And we might say, hey, have you tried this? For example, hey, I don't want to go to the office just to sign 100 checks. I don't want to get exposed. Then we might be able to offer a fairly straightforward solution, right? It's something that might be very minimal. Or maybe they have some other questions. So maybe that, it might be interesting for us to get some of those questions. Maybe they're going to ask something creative, but quite frankly, we've actually done a lot of this where we say, there's a lot of solutions out there, a lot of simple solutions, sometimes something a bit more extravagant on how to work remotely, things like that. And we'll see if that fits their needs.
Yeah, I actually love that idea. Not to derail the webinar at all, but Sabrina, maybe you can sync up with Carlos after the session and get that request out in the public so that we can try and help people, because I think that will go a long way. Carlos, I did see your email. Apologies for not getting back to you. Thank you for the reminder. But yes, so let's do that and let us know if we can help. I love that idea. Okay, so at this point, Carlos, maybe you can set up kind of what supply chain is and typically what people use it for. And then I'll make you presenter after this slide, and you can run us through what in the supply chain is going on.
Great. Yeah, so today we're going to really focus on purchase orders. So supply chain can really refer to a lot of things, right? So it can refer to issuing purchase orders, maybe processing sales orders, which is kind of the opposite end of things. It could refer to working with your inventory. It could work with a few other things as well. So I think usually when people come to us and say, can we talk about supply chain, they usually mean, let's talk about purchase orders. How does it work in GP? What sort of workflow do we have? How does it work from beginning to end? What sort of options are there, and so on? And that's really what we're going to be talking about today, right? So the first few topics over there are essentially the basics, I would say, around purchase orders. How do you create a PO? And then after that, how do you actually receive the goods or the services in GP? How do you process the invoice, and so on? And after that, there's a few other options as well that we can look into. Something that commitments, which I think for maybe 80% of the people out there, they have a good idea of what that means, whether it be within GP or not. And then maybe also have a quick look at what sort of workflow or approval options there are out there. So that essentially is the agenda for today, what we'll be talking about.
Yeah, that's good. So I'm going to make you presenter. And you should be able to see your screen now, or share your screen. There should be a plus button. Hey, awesome.
Right. Okay. All right, so I jumped into Dynamics GP through GP 365. And actually, I think I will go right to my purchasing window. So assuming that you have the purchase order window, the purchase order module, and you have security to it, then what I'm referring to is these windows right over here. And we're going to be highlighting some of them. So oh, let me, I don't know why that just popped up suddenly, but anyway, so I will, let's start off with just looking at a PO, how to create a PO, and go on through the 2 or 3 transactions that come after that. Okay, so let's just talk about creating a PO. So that is like a request, I guess you could say, to a vendor to actually to order some goods. Right now, when I say it that way, you might realize, hey, we're just requesting. So that's not necessarily a financial transaction right now. But let's, like I said, let's keep on going and see where this takes us. So I'm going to tab through and I'm going to go ahead and create a purchase order. Right, so first thing is I get a PO number, and then there's also a buyer ID in here, which some of you may use. Some of the people out there that actually have the PO module already and they're using it actively, they may use this field or they may not. And this might refer to who's actually processing the purchase order, right? And then the actual date. So today, this would normally default to today. I am in a special company, Fabricam, which actually defaults to the future. So because it's just a sample company, but this would normally default to today. So let's go ahead and make a request. I'll make a request to this company over here, Ace Travel, and I'll skip over to the line items section. All right, so here's where I'm actually going to say, here is what I'm ordering from this company. The idea is that I fill it all out. I could potentially do a copy from an old purchase order if this is kind of a recurring PO sort of thing. There's a few options in here, but I'm just going to go ahead and fill this out. And from there, I could be printing it off and sending it to the vendor, maybe by hand delivery, or maybe nowadays we would be emailing it out, which is also one of those standard options. But either way, there's a few ways of doing it. One way that you could do it is just to go straight from this window, click on the middle, the magnifying glass, and select whichever item that you are going to be requesting. Right, so I'm just going to go ahead and select the first one here. I think that's a CPU, a computer processor. Okay, so I'm ordering this item right over here. I tab. Some of this information fills in automatically. So what's the description to this? But let me actually go through all the fields to make sure that I don't miss anything. Next is what I'm ordering something by the and let's see what the unit of measure options are here. So this is something that's been defined for this item. I can order this by the case or maybe just by individual pieces. So for each one, I might order it that way. I'll go with each, and I might be ordering 3 CPUs or processors. And then it also asks, what site is this being delivered to? That would make sense if it's a physical product. Sometimes if it's a service, that might also make sense, but I'll just go ahead and select the first location that I've got. And there I go, right? So this was assuming that there were a lot of defaults in here, right? So GP already knows based on the setup that how it's being taxed and what general ledger account we're going to be using for this when we get a little further on, and some other things here and there, right? So this was a straightforward purchase order. Now, this was an item that was actually set up ahead of time, right? This is, in fact, I'm actually inventorying this. So I know that I have maybe at any one time 10 units, and then maybe I use some of them up, maybe I buy more later down the road and so on. But you could just as easily type in whatever you want, right? Based on, depending on what sort of options you have set up. But this, you could call this a non-inventoried item or a service item. So either way, this means that I'm just going to type in what I want. So let's say that I've got CPUs, but maybe I need installation services. I know some people would actually set this item up, but I'm going to say this is a non-standard item, not something that I would want to set up. And and I have some defaults coming in over here, but this is now something, again, that was made up. If I click on the magnifying glass for unit of measure, it's not really going to give me much of anything. So since this is something I'm making up on the spot, I can actually type out how I'm measuring this. So I'm going to say the service is by the hour. And then I can say, well, let's say it's 2.5 hours for installation services. I'm not sure if that's realistic, to be honest, but for CPU services, but but I think that is fine for us. There we go. So I've got installation services, a few more details in there. The site, so it's assuming it's the same site as I had before. So the CPUs are being delivered to one location, and then the services are going to be provided at that same location as well. All right. So there you go. That's creating a purchase order does not have to be complicated. And this is a starting point. Now, I will remind everyone about one thing. This is not actually a transaction. It's more of an order. I'm sending this order to the company, the vendor, and once they actually provide us a service, then maybe it starts becoming, or when we receive the invoice, then maybe we can process an invoice. But this is a request, I guess you could say, or an order to the vendor, but it's also setting up some defaults for when we get further down the line on this process. I know some of you might be saying, is this all there is to it? And I would say for some people it is, because we want to make it simple, but some people do want to see a lot of options around this. So I'm going to highlight this CPU item. And when I click on this little arrow over here, we open up the line item detail window. So essentially we're seeing more details around this, right? So I'm going to keep my eye on the clock to make sure I don't talk too much about it, because I think I could talk all day about this. But you can see at the very top, we are still requesting the same thing, right? These are the same fields. But then you can say, hey, yeah, there is that inventory account, or the GL account at the very least. And there's some dates in here. This one over here, by the way, is fairly critical. It might print off on your PO, and you might be, could be saying to the vendor, I need this item by this date, April 12th, I think is what we're seeing over here. So I cannot have it after that. And that could tell the vendor when you want this, when the delivery has to be done by. There's also some other things that this does, but let's keep it there for the moment. There's some other dates in there as well, not quite as critical, I would say. But after that, we can even say who actually requested this. So if you have a large organization, I do know at the top over here that Terry Adams is processing this PO. They are the buyer, but maybe Jeremy is the one that actually needs this, right? So once it gets delivered, we know, oh, we've got a CPU. Who is this for? Oh, it's for Jeremy. He has his own project that he's going to be processing. So there we go. I put in Jeremy. I could even put a quick comment in there. Please deliver to back of building, right? That would print off on the PO. And then I have some more details on the right side as well. There's shipping options, and there's also tax options. But you get an idea of what there is. This is not a window that you'd have to go to. Some people do make it a rule though. They go in here, make sure everything's filled out correctly every single time. Other people say, you know what, for the people who are actually processing the PO, in our team at the very least, we want to keep it nice and simple. So let's just stick to the main window and try to use some of those defaults that GP will allow us to have. Right, so that's basically what's going on. So far, I ran in here. I created a quick PO. I do have some options in here for, sorry, wrong place, but I guess it's a bit too late now if I've already created the PO. But if I was just starting, I could have copied from an old PO. I could now print my PO. When I started, faxing was still an option. I don't really see people faxing their POs much nowadays. So you could print this off as a Word document and email it to them, right? That's an option. You could, there's a few options in there, right? So I think emailing over the PO is a bit more popular than it used to be nowadays. I think that really depends more on your internal processes and possibly even the vendor as well. Right, so there's an option right over there for send document in email. I could print this off as a Word document. Like I said, a few options in there. You know what? Let's actually take a look at that PO to just get a feel of what it looks like before it's even been modified. Right, so I will take a quick look. You'll see all the information that we typed out. And keep in mind, we could be putting the logo in there. We could move a few of the fields around and so on. All right, here's my PO. And I can see that this is coming from Fabricam, which is my sample company, the one that I may be representing. And we are requesting this from a travel company, right? And then we have the some detail around what items we're actually requesting. Here's that comment that I put in there. Please deliver this particular item to the back of the building. And there's some prices and so on. Now, everything that you see in here can be modified. So if you say that doesn't really conform to what we want, then we will probably just change that. I know for one thing, a lot of people like to put some standard legal text at the very bottom, right? So that might be one thing that you might be thinking about. So there we go. That's creating a purchase order. Now that we've done that, let's actually think about what happens next. So from an accounting perspective, we've sent out a PO. No financial transaction has really happened yet. But once we receive the physical good, then I think it makes sense to everyone that our inventory levels should be going up. So that is a financial transaction. And down the road, we might also be receiving the invoice. Well, we should be receiving the invoice, in which case that's also a financial transaction. Okay, so the way I described it there, it's kind of a two-step process. We receive the goods and then we process the invoice, right? So that's one way of doing it. But another way of doing it is to get both of them at the same time. I'm sorry, to process both of them at the same time. So maybe you have a service, you're not going to say, oh, I received the service, I better do a transaction. Usually just wait for the invoice and then you process it all at once, right? So that's what I would call a one-step process. So let's take a look at that. Let's go to receiving. We started off with POs. I'm going to go to receiving transaction entry. And maybe I will highlight by saying I can process a shipment right now. That's a receiving transaction. Or I can process the receiving transaction and I can process the invoice at the same time, right? So it uses the same window 2 times, right? So that's a fast way of doing it. Some people want to sometimes recognize the inventory right away because they may not receive the invoice until 2 months later. But sometimes they say, no, what we want to streamline things, and usually there's not much time lag between the two anyway. So doing it as a one-step process maybe works for us a little bit better. But for our purposes, I'm going to do a shipment transaction, and then I'm going to do an invoicing transaction. Right, let me rephrase that. Instead of using the word shipment, I'll say I'm going to do a receiving transaction and then I'll do an invoicing transaction. That's a two-step process, right? So I'm in here, I'm doing the shipment. Now you can see, okay, looks like he's got lots of fields to fill out. Roll up your sleeves, it's time to do some work. Yep, that's one way of doing it, but another way of doing it is an automated process. So at the very top of this window, there's a button called auto receive. Right, so when I click on auto receive, it actually asks me rather, which PO I'm going to be working on. Right, I could actually have filled out the vendor ID. Depending on what I do, it might actually be asking me something else. But right now it's saying, tell me which PO you're working on, and then we're going to do the whole thing for you. So I know that the one that I just processed is the last one. Is for a travel company or Ace Travel Company. I can't remember anymore. But anyway, either way, I will select that PO. Right there it is. And I could just go ahead and click on receive all if I know that the vendor has provided me with all the goods. But my preference is to click on view details and see what it is that I actually ordered. So I ordered a multi-processor processing unit, and then I also ordered some sort of installation services as well. Right, so that's what I have. Now that I see that, I could potentially edit how much I'm receiving. Maybe I'm just getting the CPU right now and later on is the installation services, who knows? Or maybe if there's a lot of actual inventory that I'm receiving, maybe I'm only receiving half of what I received so far, right? So only half of the toilet paper that I'm hoping for right now. But anyway, that's, by the way, a coronavirus joke, in case no one got that.
Wow.
A year from now.
I don't know if we're at the point where we can make coronavirus jokes, but you know
Too
what?
soon?
Yeah, too soon, but I like that you're trying
Okay.
to liven it up. That's okay.
Yeah, but a year from now, people will be listening to this and say, "Why is he talking about toilet paper? I don't get it." And they're gonna have to remember, "Oh yeah, that's the way it was a year ago." So it's also educational. right?
Okay.
So anyway, I will go ahead and click on
Let's move on.
receive.
Yeah.
I will go ahead and click on receive. And now GP has processed everything. So there's my CPUs and there's my service, right? And within that, it also says, here's the price that we put it into originally. And then there's also the quantity, and behind the scenes, there's also the general ledger accounts and so on, right? So if I, in other words, if I click on this little arrow over here, it will say, oh, for that CPU, we're using this general ledger account. Maybe there's taxes to this. Maybe there's some other details in there, but basically it's filled it all out for me. This does not have to be a manual thing. I know that if we actually look at a real life situation, often the person receiving this may be someone at a warehouse who works in the receivings department. So they may not necessarily, their job may not be to be doing financial transactions. All they want to do is say, yep, I've processed this, check mark this. Oh, sorry, I meant to say, I received this, I've unloaded it from the truck, I just need to check mark that, and then we're done. So that's really who this is meant for. It's meant to be streamlined. Right, so given that, I think everyone got the idea of what this is for. I'll go ahead and click on post. Again, there's a few ways of doing this. I didn't necessarily have to post. I could have saved it. I could have done a few other things, right? Okay, so that was the first step. I received the goods. Now down the road, I am processing the invoice. Okay, so I'm in here. And actually the same thing applies as with the prior transaction. I do not have to carefully fill out this entire window. Let me start off though. Let me try to come up with a real life situation. I'm gonna have that mindset. So just like with any regular invoice, there's always invoice numbers to it, right? So in most systems, it's been set up to only allow that invoice, any one invoice for a vendor anyway, to be processed once. Otherwise, we may not realize that we're processing a duplicate invoice. But anyway, either way, there we go. I've typed in an invoice number. And again, instead of filling out this entire window, I'm going to go to the top. I'm going to click on auto invoice. I'm going to select which PO this is. By the way, some people say, oh, I don't know the PO, in which case the answer is select the vendor instead, but I'm not really doing it that way. I'm selecting a PO instead. So for me, it's still the last PO that I have. And again, my hope or my process, I should say, is that I don't just automatically invoice everything or I don't automatically receive everything. My preference is to click on the view details button, confirm what it is that I'm going to be invoicing, because maybe I'm only being invoiced for part of it right now and then part of it a week from now, who knows, right? So I'm confirming, yes, here's what I'm invoicing, and maybe there's some other details, but I will go ahead and click on invoice. I have confirmed what I'm actually processing this invoice for, and it all gets in here. So if everything is perfect, you're done. At this stage though, what I would suggest to any accounts payable person is don't just let everything automatically come in. I'm sure it's great, but potentially what the vendor may have invoiced you for, maybe the price is a little bit different. Maybe it's a little bit lower than what you originally assumed when you were creating the PO, right? In which case it's actually $15,950, and maybe the taxes are a little bit different than you. Maybe they're rounding up and you were rounding down. There might be a few things in there. So there's a few options in there. There are, GP does have some rules that we can use in case you need to increase the amounts, right? So maybe there's a certain price tolerance in there. So it won't just let you double the price at this stage. I would also suggest though that for any accounts payable person, when you're doing this, if the price is significantly different though, and it's higher, then I would probably just call up your vendor in that case and say, why is this invoice not matching to what we expected, to what our PO said? But from a GP perspective, in terms of actual data entry, you've seen how I do it. I clicked on the auto invoice button, I let it all come in. I maybe double check the amounts in here and maybe edit them if I need to. And after that, I'm done. Right, so that's all that there really is to it. This is when this invoice is for a PO, we use this invoice, this window. If it's something for like for utilities, for example, or Bell Canada, whatever it may be, then we would use the regular accounts payable invoice window, right? So don't use both of them for the same invoices. I guess what I'm really getting at. But either way, I think I'm done. I'll click on post, and this invoice is done. So that is my quick overview of what the general process is like. With that in mind, let me actually talk about a couple of extra options. So there's one that I've always really loved. It seems so simple, but it really provides an extra layer to your reporting, to your financial reporting. So while we're going through the year, then obviously we're getting all sorts of expenses, $5,000 here, $10,000 there, and so on. And maybe halfway through the year or 3/4 through the year, you print off your net income statement, and you get an idea of how you've done so far, maybe compared to the budget. But what happens if you have a $1 million PO lying out there? You're expecting it later. You've actually legally committed to buying that because you have issued that PO. That isn't reflected in your financial reports because you haven't actually received the invoice yet, right? So that's a scenario that I'd like to briefly talk about. In GP, you know what? Let me actually use these the actual purchasing page. In GP, there's something called purchase order enhancements. And I'm, by the way, under the setup section. And in there is a feature called commitment setup. So for me, it's already been activated. And when I actually get in there, then I can see for one of my years, I have a budget assigned to it. So basically, I'm saying for this year, I'm going to be tracking my commitments. I'm going to be tracking the dollar amount of my POs, right? And I may be comparing that to my budget as well to make sure that I don't accidentally go over budget. That second part that I said is an option. You don't have to do it that way. I, for one, have not done it that way. I've said, yes, I have a budget, but I don't want to restrict the ability to create POs based on that budget, because if I'm going over, well, I guess that's too bad, but we need to get going on our projects, and if it's a little bit, if it's $5 over, then we'll suck it up, right? There is this part right over here that says how much over the budget are you allowed to go, and for myself, I have just put in a big number. But you could say I am allowed to go, let's say 15% over budget before the warning flags start coming up. Having said that, let's just take a step back. The whole point here is that we are tracking commitments, right? So we are tracking how much we have out there in unreceived, I guess you could say, POs or uninvoiced POs. And we need to know that. We need to know how much we've committed to buying when we get down to the to the financial reports. So that's what this feature is for. I already have it activated. But what that basically does is it creates a shadow budget. I'm going to phrase it that way, a shadow budget for the commitments. Okay, so I'm going to Cards Financial Budgets. That's my budget window. And you'll notice right over here, I've got a budget that GP created. I did not create it, but GP automatically created that just to track how many open purchase orders are still out there, right? So once we received it, that goes away from my commitments budget, but this is where the numbers are being stored, just so you know. The whole point around, or at least the main point around the commitments feature is that we can report on that. So for those of you who use the Management Reporter, by the way, we did a Management Reporter webinar and bootcamp not that long ago, but so if you want to have an overview of what that is, you can look at our replays on our website and take a look. But having said that, in Management Reporter, I can report on that fairly easily, right? So how about what I do is, and by the way, I'm not going to do a Management Reporter training session right now. I'm just going to show you the result of it. But if I were to generate that, then fairly soon rather, I will get the report and you'll see what I've got in there. I always do that. I forget to change it to the proper date. So keep in mind, this is a test company for me. So for test companies or sample companies, we usually put the date in the future. So I have to actually adjust the date. GP likes to use the system date as the default, and that's not really where my data is. So like I was saying, I'm printing off a quick report just to show you that here's what this sort of thing could look like. I have my actuals. On my first column is my actual amounts for the year. And then I have how much we've committed to buying, right? I have that under my expenses section, right? So I've committed to buying $24,000 of vehicles and so on. So that's what this column is. Then I have my how much I've actually spent plus what I've committed to spending. And I sure hope that that number is less than my budget amount, right? So that's essentially what we're doing. I think this is a lot better, assuming you're using the PO module. This is a lot better than just comparing your actuals to your budget. You should be comparing, or so you should be including, I should say, your commitments to your, as part, you should be using that as part of what you're comparing to the budget. If you spent, let's say, $1 million in actuals, you actually spent that much this year, but then you've also spent an extra $200,000 in commitments, right? So you've committed to buying an extra $200,000, then that's kind of important information. And that those two numbers combined should hopefully be less than your budget amount, or at least in the general area, right? Keep in mind that the commitments amounts are just a budget thing, right? So I'm taking a quick look. Again, I know this is not a management reporter session, but right in here, I have all my columns set up, and basically the commitments, what is that? That's actually just a budget, right? So if I double click, I can see all my budgets, and at the very bottom, I have the commitments. That's what that column is. If anyone, this is a bit of a mind breaker for everyone. We started talking about POs, and now we're in Management Reporter, and someone just wants me to remind them how to do this. Maybe they need a few tips. Just contact us, and I'll give you that hint to get you going, and hopefully that will set you in the right direction. But let's take the big picture now. We started with the PO module. The whole point of the PO module is to control what we're buying. So we create the PO, and then we receive it, and then we process the invoice for it. We could even be tracking what we're sending out POs for. So in other words, we could be tracking the commitments, and that for the most part is what we're aiming to talk about over here. Nowadays, here's my the last bit of today. So nowadays there are a lot of new features in the PO module, right? So one of them, if you've been using GP for a long time, then you may say, hey, purchase requisitions, what in the world is that? That is something that did not exist, let's say maybe 5 years ago, I guess, right? And basically that is, some people call it requisition management. There may be people who are creating the POs, but there may be other people outside of the purchasing department that want to request the order of an item, right? So they say, oh, well, I'm repairing a car, I need some car parts, and maybe they'll request that to their purchasing department. And once the purchasing department sees that, they can handle it their own way using their own processes. That can be turned into a PO, and then it kind of continues from there. So this is a way of assisting the purchasing department if there is a lot of coordination that has to happen, right? If there's just one person doing POs for a couple of others, it's not a big deal. But when you start talking about a large department, maybe a lot of people, then maybe some coordination would be helpful, and that's where the requisition features come in. So this is one process that is very useful. It's kind of an add-on, I'd say, although it is, you don't have to buy it separately. It actually comes with GP. Another one is approval processes, right? So for any one purchase order, you could be creating the PO, and potentially we could add in the feature, which again comes with GP, is something called approval workflow. And basically, I created the PO, and from there, the request may go to my approving manager to approve that PO, and then that PO can be printed off and sent to the vendor. So that's another way of controlling things. At the core of it though, creating the PO and then doing the receiving and the invoicing, that's the main part of the purchase order module. And then we've got these extras there that are immediately available to you at no extra charge that will help you manage everything a little bit more, whether it be on the reporting side or on the audit control side. So there we go. That's a little bit about the purchase order module. There's a lot to that. What I didn't really talk about is the inventory side of things as a whole different module, but it integrates very nicely with the purchase order module. You're ordering inventory items, or maybe you're just ordering things that you're making up on the spot, service items or things that you're not inventorying. But there we go. That's what the PO module looks like.
Nice. So you're all good, Carlos?
Yeah, I've talked myself out today, but potentially we could do another webinar down the road for the extras.
Got it. Okay, cool. So I'm going to steal back presenter and we'll just finish this off. Give everybody back maybe 10 minutes or so by the time we get through. So bear with me. Okay. All right. So let's talk a little bit about our events. Thank you, Carlos. That's great. Now, as I mentioned, we are doing a boot camp on April 24th about supply chain. Now, the whole idea of this boot camp, well, actually, maybe Carlos, do you want to talk a little bit about, you know, your plan for that boot camp and kind of what you're going to be going into in a bit more detail?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of detail that we glazed over. So setting up inventory items to create POs out of, and then how does that requisition process work in the first place? And how do we actually use those POs? How do in more detail? So what does each field mean specifically? How does the commitments work? You know, a lot more detail around this. You know, I think for anyone who's interested, we do already have a detailed agenda of what we're going to be talking about. So feel free to, if you have interest, message John, give him a call, whatever, and ask what it is in a bit more detail. We'll send you the agenda.
Cool.
If you have any extra questions, then we'd be happy to help out with that.
Yeah, thank you for that. So we're dividing our events into two categories. The first is webinars, which is very similar to kind of what we're doing today. They're going to be an hour long and they're aimed at covering a kind of a micro topic or a larger topic, but in, you know, lesser detail or more high level. And then we're doing boot camps, which have a cost associated with them. And of course, they're, you know, very include, you know, sort of they cover a lot. They're designed to give you everything you need about that specific topic. They also are a full day. So when you have a look at the boot camps and the dates there, keep in mind that they have a cost of $600 if you are not a GP365 customer, and if you are a GP365 customer, they're half price. So there's a little look at our dates, and of course they're also all reflected on our website. If you go to gp365.ca, then click training and go to events, all of these will be there. Go sign up before they fill up. And also the blog. So Sabrina, who is actually here quietly listening today, she is hard at work on posting the events that we do as videos to our blog, as well as text blogs. So, you know, keep an eye out there. We also post them to our social media. So like us on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, all that stuff, so you can be kept in the loop. And we're also going to start doing giveaways on our social platforms. So yeah, go there and check it out. And with that said, thank you. Any questions, anything we can help answer? Of course, the next event is in April. We're hoping that the world is a whole lot more simple then, and we're back to kind of normality, or what we used to call normality. But if we're still in the same case we are now, all of our boot camps will be remote, and you know, right now we provide the option for both, but we may have to transition to just remote if that's the case. Let me just have a quick look at questions. I think I see one or two. Okay, so a couple questions here. In this boot camp, would we be talking about workflow in purchasing?
Yes, so we'll be taking a closer look at that. I'll show you all the options around it, and then we'll do a sample approval tree. That's what I would call it. And we'll actually see it in action, right? Sometimes it's a little awkward in my case to be both the requester and the improver at the same time, but I think we'll have enough people then to have a real working situation.
Okay, another question is, everything you showed today, is there a certain version of GP that's required? Or are all these features part of?
Sorry, the purchase order module has been around for a very long time, so at least 15 years. I think that specifically with the workflow that we were just talking about, the latest versions have a few more options around that. So workflow is, relatively speaking, a newer feature. So I think that's where you might find more benefit in having the latest version.
Cool. I also see a question here. Let me just read through here. Trying to get to the ones I think we can cover. So this is one, I don't know if you can jump back into this or not, or if you'd rather cover this in the boot camp, but received but not invoiced. Can we go over that a little? Is that something you think? Is that something you can do easily?
I think it is.
Okay,
I think you have to make me presenter again.
I do. All right, should be good to go.
Okay. So received, now I'm making an assumption that that is referring to a smart list, right? So actually, there's a smart list for that, and there's also a report for that. But at the end of the day, they show the same information, right? So I think we're okay with looking at either one. So received, I guess I went to the wrong place. Okay, now I'm starting shipments received, there it is. Shipments received but not invoiced. So at one point I was saying, hey, okay, we've got a PO, we create that and then receive it, but then you have to make really sure that the invoice goes into the PO invoicing window, not your regular invoicing window. Sometimes people forget that, right? So sometimes they look at an invoice and assume that there's no PO for it, in which case they use the regular invoicing window. So I think that's potentially a problem, right? And that's what this report is for. So there's a different version of this as well somewhere out there. There's an SSRS version and so on, but I typically just stick to the smart list, right? Either way, like I said, it shows the same information. And here it's actually telling you these POs have been received, but so far we have not been invoiced. If it were me, I might even try to fine tune this smart list. I might say, let's only look at that if that in the shipment or the receiving transaction was 2 or 3 months old, because by then surely we would have received the invoice by now, right? So this is meant to help you out to catch that. And that's essentially what we're trying to do here. We're trying to make sure that we have not goofed up anywhere along the line. So there are a few month-end processes and year-end processes that I like to follow to make sure that we're okay, right? So for example, as a year-end process, I might look at all existing POs and close the ones that are inactive. For example, the vendor went out of business, or it's just a really, really, really old PO, whatever it is, right? Cancel in that situation. And I think that would be one process. So as maybe a month-end process, I would go in here, I would review what's outstanding, what's received but not invoiced, and really troubleshoot essentially. Is this 4-month-old PO received but not invoiced? Maybe it makes sense, or maybe it doesn't, right? So that's essentially what this is. An opportunity for you to go review, make sure that the vendor is on top of things, and make sure that someone on your side didn't make a mistake of some sort. I don't know if anyone has any additional questions related to this, then maybe at this stage, just feel free to email us and I'll follow up on that and answer the more specific question.
Thank you. No, Carlos, it was awesome. Yeah, I really appreciate you giving us such a comprehensive overview in only 30 minutes. Covered a lot, so thank you for that. So a big thank you to everybody else. Really appreciate everybody joining today. And stay safe, social distancing. This is a great way to do it and still, use the time off to, better your skills and, keep learning and all that sort of thing. So thank you, everybody. And again, our next event, go check out our website, sign up, and we'll talk to everybody soon. Thanks, Carlos. Thanks, Sabrina.
Great, thank you.